Welcome, everyone, to the Monday Afternoon Roundtable. This is episode 8. Got all the Monday boys here today. What's going on?
Happy to be here.
Good morning to get everything get started.
Today we're going to talk about a double homicide that occurred in 1957 involving two North Carolina State Patrolmen. It was a deeply involved case because it was one of the largest manhunts ever in the state of North Carolina.
And it's a little different than the cases we've handled before or talked about on the podcast in that it's not a cold case or an unsolved case.
That's right. Yeah, and it was the gentleman involved was Mr. Frank Wetzel. Wetzel was born October 12th, 1921, to give you a little perspective about the defendant in this case. A lot of controversy, a lot of information online, social media about Frank Wetzel. Give a little bit more history. Frank Wetzel was the longest-serving inmate in the state of North Carolina in the Department of Corrections, and he was the oldest inmate at the time. He literally served a life sentence, which was given to him. Both juries in the case, because the shootings occurred in two different counties, the verdict was guilty with mercy. Have you ever heard that? Neither have I. And it was, and by doing that, you could tell the juror was somebody on that jury was a little bit reluctant. But you got to remember the time frame, 1957. The case involved Mr. Wetzel. He was an inmate at Attica State Penitentiary in the state of New York, which was a high-end prison as far as
world-famous prison,
tight security. If you remember the movie The Longest Yard with Burt Reynolds, where they had the football team from Attica that the guards played the inmates, and it was a big ado. And if the inmates won, they got a steak dinner, and it was back and forth. The guards would win one year, and the inmates would win. Frank Wetzel was part of that team at the Attica prison. He was the quarterback and the player coach at one time while he was there. Frank was in and out of prison all of his life. As a juvenile, he would steal from people. He would break in. It was petty crimes for the most part, but he was a criminal. And if he would have been convicted for this last robbery and breaking and entering that occurred, he would be life in prison in the state of New York, because at that time, in 1957, the state of New York had the habitual felon.
Wow.
3 strikes, you're out kind of thing.
And going back to the football game, isn't there another similarity with the movie with this about the uniforms?
The only similarity Frank talks about later, after the conviction, much later after the conviction, he's in prison, and he befriends a reporter from WRAL, I think is where he was. He was a sports announcer, and not to give his name, but he was called Mouth of the South is what the name he was given. And he was controversial kind of sports commentator, but he went on, and I think he went on to the Philadelphia market where he retired and later died. But he was a renowned sports announcer. And it was kind of weird that he got involved with Frank Wetzel, but they became best friends. And he was writing what looks like a book about Frank's life and the incident and the fact that Frank was innocent in his mind, and as did a lot of other people, felt that Frank was innocent. But anyhow, Frank broke out of Attica prison, and he didn't actually break out of the prison.
Did it say anything about the uniforms?
Oh, let me back up. I'm sorry. Excuse me. Frank, when he played football, Wake Forest University gave their uniforms after they used them. They sent them to Attica prison for the football team up there. Pads, clothing, shirts, everything. That's what the inmates used as part of the team. So Frank was kind of intrigued with the fact that Wake Forest would do that, and on his way to Mississippi Parchman Penitentiary in the state of Mississippi to break his brother out of prison, who was on death row for murder. His brother had killed an inmate on the farm there at Parchman Penitentiary in Mississippi. A guard at Attica prison called Frank over, and which Frank was reluctant to even, it was during football practice, was reluctant to even go over and talk to the guard because you didn't want to be a snitch. And that was what he thought the other inmates would think of him talking to a guard. The guard said, "Frank, you need to come and talk to me." So Frank reluctantly goes over, and he said, "Just to let you know, your brother's getting ready to be fried down at Mississippi in a couple weeks." Frank let it, went back to the practice, didn't even engage with the inmate or the guard. And so he decides, with his sister pushing him, to go get a psychological evaluation because he's always in trouble all of his life. So he decides, I can break out of the mental hospital a lot easier than I can out of prison. Mm-hmm. Frank was a smart man, and because he had, according to the sports announcer, he had an IQ of 146. That's in the Einstein category. I don't think his IQ was that high, but Frank was very intelligent, well-read, smart individual. He just was a criminal and would get caught most of the time. Good-looking man. He had blue eyes, fair skin, chiseled cheekbones, just a good-looking man. So he gets to the mental institution. They do the evaluation. He's on the 3rd floor. He jimmies the door bars on the window, uses a mop handle. This is pretty cool. Gets the mop handle between the bars to lower himself down to where it'll break the fall a little bit from the 3rd floor. There was an armed guard on the 2nd floor. And Frank was going to have to go right by him on the way down. So he decided, well, screw it. I'll let go. He let go. He falls 3 stories and kind of rolls with the fall. Sprains his ankle, takes off running and doesn't stop. Gets away. He's a free man at that point. Frank, with his persona, decided that he's going to steal cars. Of course, you got to have transportation to get to Mississippi. He doesn't steal used cars on the lot. He steals the cars in the showroom. The brand new 1957 Oldsmobile was the first one, or I think was the first one he stole. And he breaks out of the car dealership. It's on a weekend, if I'm not mistaken. He planned this thing fairly well because the dealership was closed. They didn't discover it till that Monday morning, but he's way down the road, and I think he totally steals 6 vehicles during this whole.
And he's hot seating them, going from one car to the next, right?
That's right, and which was smart on his part. The 57 Olds had a 1957 tag from Pennsylvania. That's where he stole the Oldsmobile. He comes into North Carolina on US 220, which is south of Greensboro. Well, he'd already got into North Carolina, but he's on 220 south of Greensboro and sees a black male gentleman hitchhiking. Frank pulls over. The black male named Mr. Terry gets in the car with him, and he has a Bible and a pair of gloves. It's November 5th. Remember this, 1957. It's cold. He gets in this 57 Oldsmobile, brand new car, gentleman dressed in a suit and tie, good-looking guy, and he just says he was afraid to look at him. He felt that a black man looking at a white man in 1957 in a brand new car, he didn't want to scare him, didn't want to offend him, so he just kept looking straight ahead. He just appreciated the ride.
And this was during the time of segregation.
Big time, big time. So he sits in the car, he kind of glances over, and he asks the driver, Frank Wetzel, "You care if I smoke?" This is an important part. Frank said, "No, I don't care." Lights up a cigarette, and he's got a matchbook and a cigarette. He smokes it. And Mr. Terry said, "I smoke a cigarette all the way to the butt because I want to get all of it because cigarettes are so expensive." And so he puts the cigarette out in an ashtray. He said he remembered seeing a green light in the ashtray. And back then they had little lights in the ashtray. Everyone, for the most part, smoked. Puts the cigarette out, and they're traveling down the road, and he tells the driver, he said, "Man, you better slow down." Said the patrolman in this area work it hard because he was from that area. And lo and behold, Frank's talking about going to Florida to play in a bridge tournament, of all things. And poor old Mr. Terry knows nothing about bridge, but Frank kept talking to him, just was very talkative, whistling to the radio music that was playing on the radio, singing, had sort of a little accent maybe. Well, when the patrolman sees him, he's parked at a church doing what was called a whammy speed watch. And it usually took 2 patrolmen to do it. The other trooper or patrolman was there working with him, had gotten a speeder, and went to the police department to process him, and was on his way back. Well, let me back up. Well, Frank's driving south on 220 with Mr. Terry, sees the patrolman. The patrolman pulls out, and the patrolman's name was W.L. Reese. He pulls out and pursues the 1957 Oldsmobile. And ultimately turns the red light on at the time to pull him over, and the Oldsmobile pulls over to the shoulder of the road. Patrolman pulls behind him, textbook stop.
Now, back then, they didn't typically call it in, or did they?
They don't call them in today.
That's what I was,
Jason, which
yeah.
is kind of weird.
Yeah.
Only time they'll call in a stop is if it's something weird, maybe
Something suspicious.
right. Because they stopped so many cars, that's all they'd be doing all day long. But anyhow, they didn't do it back then. He gets out of the car. Well, Wetzel's whole demeanor changes, according to Mr. Terry. He reaches in the glove box of that 1957 Oldsmobile, pulls out a .44 caliber revolver. Mr. Terry described it as a big gun, big pistol. And Mr. Terry says, "Mister, you can't do that. You can't shoot a patrolman." He said, "I got to. I have to," is what he said to him. But he said his whole persona changed. His demeanor changed. His speech tone changed. His accent changed. He gets out of the car, walks back to meet the patrolman Reese, and shoots him in the abdomen with the .44 caliber. Of course, he drops instantly. Mr. Terry, before the shot went off, he's going, "Hell with this, I'm getting out of here." So he opens the door quietly to not alert Wetzel, rolls out of the car, and Mr. Terry was a little man, small stature. He rolls out of the car and kind of gets into a ditch, and when he's getting out, he hears the gun go off. So Wetzel runs back to the car, sees that Terry's no longer in the car, so he backs up, hoping to run over him, hits the patrol car with that Oldsmobile. Then he takes off, squeals the tires, takes off. An off-duty highway patrolman named Hubert Covington is at his mother-in-law's house smoking a cigarette on the front porch.
Very close to
He was over 100 yards away. A house was set way off the road. I think it was 130 yards from where he was to the patrol car. Of course, he hears the siren, and he sees the red light, and he sees the stop. He's just watching. There's nothing unusual at that point. But he was a new highway patrolman in 1957, or fairly new. Hears the gun go off. Oh shit! He runs up there, finds Reese still alive, but fighting for his life, laying on his back in the roadway. He sees a black male in the patrol car. Well, it's kind of unclear what all happened at that point, but I think he thought Mr. Terry was the shooter, is what it looks like. Okay. He sees Mr. Terry in the patrol car trying to talk on the radio. Well, the Highway Patrol's radio system, as Tim knows, is a little bit different. The microphone looks like a telephone receiver, the old-timey telephone receivers. And Mr. Terry was talking on the microphone, but he wasn't pushing the transmit button. And he was scared to death, you can imagine. So Covington gets him out of the car, and he's telling him, "Look, mister, this guy shot him, and I was a passenger in the car." So they kind of figure that out. Well, the patrolman that had been there earlier is getting back in his car, and he hears Covington say, "Patrolman's been shot, 220. He knows exactly who it is because they were watching speed. So he gets to the scene, and by this point, Patrolman Reese had died in the roadway. Large bullet hole wound right below his thigh in his belly.
Do we know any background on Reese?
Reese had three or four children, small. He was working, glad you asked the question, he was working off duty, extra duty, if you will, to buy his daughter a Brownie Scout uniform. She needed a uniform, and it was going to take some money, so he was working extra shift to get off extra duty pay. Didn't even know they did that in 1957, but they did. Sweet little girl, and I think that's all he had was daughters. And
how long had he been on with the patrol? Do you have?
He'd been on over 10 years, based on what I said. Because I found you and I were looking at a roster from 1947, and Reese's name was on it. Mm-hmm. So he'd been on at least 10 years, and he was stationed, I think, at one time in Walkertown, North Carolina, which is near Kernersville, Winston-Salem. Then he moved to Richmond County. Don't know if that was his home place or not, but at the time, Tim remembers well, you'd have to be away from your duty station for 10 years or your home location, and then you could go back. So that's probably the case. Had a family, beautiful wife.
Was Frank still in the stolen car, the Oldsmobile?
He was.
So that was the first car he stole?
I don't think it was the first one. I think it was the second one, Tim, if I'd have to research a little more, but I believe it was the second car he stole.
And you're saying he is in a suit and tie.
Suit and tie. And the story behind that was he would break into clothing stores at night and steal the best suits he could find. Well, one he stole, the pants didn't fit. So he goes to a tailor shop, or a men's clothing store, which we're right over in our office, which is kind of weird. And he goes in and asks the clerk, can you fix these pants? And my wife bought them. I've lost a bunch of weight. And the guy said, yeah. And he said, it'll take me a couple hours. And he said, well, I'll just go downtown and mess around till you get it done. He said, according to the store clerk, Wetzel leaves. He sews the pants or hems the pants and tightens them up like he needs to. Frank was built at a small waist, kind of larger chest, so he got him fixed up. Frank comes back, fills out a ticket, and he used a different name, of course. He didn't use Frank Wetzel. He used the name of the individual of the stolen car. His name was on the registration. Moser, if I'm not mistaken, was the guy's last name.
So he pre-planned every step he made.
Frank planned every step, and he did a good job with it because he had that criminal mind.
How did he pay for the tailor job?
He had stolen money on the way. I was thinking about that today, Tim, on the way to the office. I said, where was Frank getting his money? Because he never was a recorded breaking in where money was stolen. So he was doing that. He did that somewhere along the way. But there was never any reports of any armed robberies or anything like that, which there could have been. They just didn't find it. But he had cash. So he goes and pays. He gets the suit, puts it on, looks good, takes off. He's going to Wake Forest University, which at the time was in the town of Wake Forest, not in Winston-Salem where it currently is. And Wake Forest is north of Raleigh. For whatever, according to his statement to the sports writer, I went to Wake Forest to see the college. I was, wanted to see where our uniforms came from, and then that's the only time I was in North Carolina, which is bullshit. He looked like he comes straight down 220 and never was in Wake Forest. Come down 220 through Greensboro, which is about, 100 miles west of Raleigh, Greensboro.
Maybe not 100 miles.
Yeah, give or take. And so, remember, there was no interstates. Interstates didn't come to 1959. So, he's coming down to US 220, picks up Mr. Terry, shoots Patrolman Reese, kills him. Mr. Terry jumps out. Wetzel's on the run. Big manhunt. You can imagine the radio traffic. Patrolman Covington said it was a dark-colored Chevrolet. Well, it was a dark-colored two-tone Oldsmobile, 57 Oldsmobile. Good-looking car. Black over white, I think it was. He goes out of Richmond County. If you remember where Rockingham Speedway is, it's still there. It wasn't there at the time, but there's a road that cuts across that comes back over to number 1, which is the major north-south freeway or thoroughfare at that time from New York to Miami, number 1 highway. So he gets on number 1. He's going north. Patrolman Brown, J.T. Brown, I think was his initials, he sees a car speeding, goes by him speeding, a high rate of speed. He turns around, so this might be it. He calls everybody, said, hey, I'm after him. Set up a roadblock, calls the other patrolman who was north of number 1 and near Sanford, says, let's block him in. Well, Brown gets back on the radio and says, no, this isn't him. This is just another speeder from Pennsylvania.
And I'm assuming he made that assumption before getting out.
He did.
But he had the wrong information. Remember,
they had wrong. They
gave out on the broadcast a different description.
Correct.
That's right.
But now Coverton was a pretty good ways away. He couldn't see everything up close as Mr. Terry could.
It was dark at that time.
Yeah, it was dark. Don't recall exactly, but it was dark at the time. It was before midnight. And the times are important because, we'll get to that later, but the Wetzel was on number 1. Brown gets behind him, stops him. Then he calls the other patrolman, said, it's not him, it's just another speeder from Pennsylvania. So they all kind of just, okay, we're going back to look for this Chevrolet. So they go off the scene. Brown stops him, gets out of the car, same MO. Wetzel gets out, shoots him in the gut with a 44 caliber pistol. He doesn't die. Then, of course, Wetzel takes off. The Oldsmobile takes off. Brown's on the highway. He falls to the roadway. He can't move. He can't move his lower body. He thinks his legs are broken. And then a motorist and his wife from Florida are on the way back to New England, stops to help. He sees him laying in the road bleeding, and so the man gets out, helps him back to the patrol car, and Brown gets on the radio, said, "It was him. He shot me too. He shot me too." So everybody goes to Brown. They get him in the patrol cars. They don't even wait on the ambulance. They get him to the hospital. Surgeon on duty. He's there, which is unusual at that time of night. He's begging the surgeon, don't let me die, don't let me die. He broke my legs. My legs are broke, which in reality his spine was probably severed. They put him on the operating table, put him to sleep. He dies while he's having surgery. Probably bleeds out from a .44 caliber wound. They get him to the Wetzel's on the run at this point. Nobody can find him. They look. It's a huge manhunt. Okay, so go ahead a little bit. FBI gets involved. They start looking at every state. Well, they see where, like you were saying, what do you call them? Stop and steal, where he was stealing cars.
Yeah, or hot seat.
Hot seat cars. He got rid of that car in Chattanooga, Tennessee, the Oldsmobile. Steals another vehicle. He steals a wrecker somewhere along the line because he can't get into a car. Nobody, he couldn't find the keys.
And they haven't put two and two together that it's Frank Wetzel, the escaped inmate from Attica.
Right.
This hasn't
right
happened yet.
But when the vehicles in Chattanooga start happening, they figure it out. They say, okay, this might be the same guy. So they get the FBI involved, get the Highway Patrol in North Carolina involved, and so they take Mr. Terry to Chattanooga because they say the car meeting that description was stolen or found, and another car was stolen. They take Mr. Terry up there. Mr. Terry says, if my cigarette is in that ashtray that I smoked, that's the car. He said, I can tell you if I was in that car. So they load him up, take him to Chattanooga, and he said, that's it. He goes and gets the cigarette out of that, or shows them the cigarette in the ashtray, and it was the car.
And that's just old-fashioned good police work.
It was.
And Mr. Terry being a good witness.
It was a really good witness at that point. How much credibility they gave him is another thing. But obviously they did because they took him to Chattanooga to see. Found the car, found fingerprints in the car. Of course, Wetzel's fingerprints were on file in the state of New York for all of his crimes, matched them up.
So now
that's when they figured out it's Frank Wetzel. Wanted posters, and you'll see some of the wanted posters on our website later when Garrett, he'll put those on. But they had photographs of Frank, said, cop killer or police killer or whatever, put it all over the country. And case went cold, couldn't find him. No other sighting, but they were getting stolen vehicles in between these locations, but they didn't really put two and two together at that point.
And this was well before NCIC, the National Criminal.
Which, when you go back to good police work, it was at the time. FBI involved. 2 weeks later, 14 days later, a Bakersfield police officer in Bakersfield, California, sees a vagrant, sees him at a dumpster, sees him throw stuff in the dumpster. I think he had burglary tools on him, a crowbar or something like that. He brings him in. Okay, it's a vagrant, brings him into the police department. They process him. They fingerprint him. Fingerprints match those of Frank Wetzel. Boom, they got him. So 2 days after the Bakersfield arrest, North Carolina's involved. They get warrants for him, and they're going to extradite back to North Carolina. At the time, Tim, and I didn't know this, if you refuse to fly, if the inmate or the defendant refuses to fly, you have to bring them by ground transportation.
Correct.
And he said he wouldn't let them fly. So they flew out, a captain with the Highway Patrol, the sheriff of Richmond County, Sheriff Goodman, and we'll talk about him in a little bit, and then a representative from the Department of Corrections in North Carolina. 3 men get on an airplane. It takes them, I think it was 14 hours to get from North Carolina to L.A. because of bad weather. And this was a old prop plane at the time. Remember
layovers and everything.
Yeah. And it was bad weather. There was snow, I think, in Chicago or Washington, D.C., somewhere where they had a layover. So, anyhow, it took them 12 hours. They get there to L.A. They go straight to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office, where Frank's at that time, and process him, load his ass up, extradition to North Carolina. Governor Hodges signed the extradition papers, and the governor of California signed on his end at that time. Load his ass up on a train, Amtrak train, bring him from Los Angeles to Raleigh, North Carolina. It was a 3-day trip, 3 or 4 days. I'm thinking 3 days, 4 nights, something like that. They get to North Carolina on the train, but during the train ride, the captain on board, the captain from the Highway Patrol, told him from the beginning, whatever you say, Mr. Wetzel, can be used against you. We will use, you can talk, you can say whatever you want, but whatever you say can and will be used against you. Pre-Miranda.
Before Miranda.
Way before Miranda. But he told him that, and it's in his notes, and I've seen the notes where that captain indicated date, time, what he told him, every conversation he had with him.
Good police work.
Was. Well, the old captain, of course, he has to rest, and then the sheriff would sit with him. But they told Frank, they said, if you make any attempt to escape, we'll kill you. Your life will end, basically. And Frank said, well, it'll be you may need to keep somebody between me and that door right there, is what Frank said. They kind of befriended one another on that train ride. You can tell by the notes that they had friendly conversation on the way back. And that long of a trip, you're either going to like the guy or not. But Frank would talk about little breaking innards that he did, how, basically what his life was about, that he had sisters, brothers, and his daddy was a hard, solid worker back in the state of New York. And, they kind of, and all that was in the notes. They get back to Raleigh, North Carolina, and it's a freaking spectacle. The reporters, hundreds of people were there from everywhere for this story because 2 patrolmen had been killed. And they turned him into a kind of a Hollywood star a little bit. Frank, being good looking as he was, smart as he was, flash bulbs flashing. He gets off. I got a photograph of him, a black and white photo of Frank getting off the train, Sheriff Goodman on one side, the good captain on the other side, and the prison guard behind him with a pistol under his overcoat in Frank's back.
And there's an article
about
describing that too as well.
And you can kind of see it in the photographs if you look close. You can see the overcoat behind. He's got that pistol in Frank's back, and you run, you're going to be shot. So Frank's smiling for the cameras, walks into the Wake County. They took him straight to the Department of Corrections at the Central Prison. They do a lineup, and you've done many lineups. I know Jason's done lineups. I got the photograph of the lineup that they do at the Department of Corrections. I think they get prison guards, anybody they could get, and it was a little off a little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah, they had tall, they had short, they had old. It ranged from age, I think, 19 to 63 or 64. Mm-hmm. You had old men standing there, and you had young men. Anyhow, they bring Mr. Terry to Central Prison to point him out of the lineup. So he narrows it down to 2, and sure enough, 2 look alike, Frank Wetzel and this other gentleman. And Mr. Terry described him as a dark-skinned, dark-complected, dark-eyed man, but Terry never looked at him directly in the eye, based on all of his statements. Well, Frank Wetzel's got blonde hair and fair skin. Excuse me, blue eyes and fair skin with a light-colored hair. Brings him in. He says he narrows it down to 2. He said, if I can speak with them, I can tell you who it is. So they let him. They go in. They let Mr. Terry go in and actually talk to those 2 he picked out. Everyone else was relieved. He goes, have you read the Bible? And can you tell me the 10 Commandments? Those are the things he asked Wetzel and the other inmate or the other person in the lineup. Both of them said, yeah, I've read the Bible, but I couldn't tell you the 10 Commandments. I know them, but I couldn't give them verbatim. He said, okay. He goes back, and he said, it was the first guy I talked to, which was Frank Wetzel. Let the other guy go. Boom, they got Frank Wetzel. They do all the charges. They 2 months later, Jason, they have the trial. Would that happen today?
Absolutely not.
Hell
No.
no. How many years would
5,
at least?
Yeah, 3 to 5.
2 months later, they have the trial, and they have it in Richmond County. Sheriff Goodman is there. He kind of controls that. That's his county. Sheriff Goodman in North Carolina. We all three work for a sheriff. We know how powerful, and I've talked about it in other podcasts, how powerful the sheriff is in each county. By God, Sheriff Goodman was the man there. He was the one that everyone went to when they would decide to run for office. He owned the main mill there in the county in Rockingham. He was just a big deal in the county. As a matter of fact, there's a bridge named after him on US 74 today. Okay, he wanted that publicity. You can tell he thrived for attention. There was a pissing contest between Sheriff Goodman and the Highway Patrol because Goodman wanted Wetzel in his jail in Richmond County instead of Central Prison.
And which back in 1957, the county jails were probably not the most secure
as they are now.
Yeah.
And they felt more secure in having him at Central Prison. Central Prison was, I think, over 100 miles away from Richmond County, a good ways up the road. And so Colonel of the Highway Patrol, Colonel Smith at the time, said, nope, he's staying in Central Prison, and we'll transport him and have him there every day on time. So they put a security team together, which was pretty cool. And I knew some of those people and was able to interview them later on in life with my career with the Highway Patrol. So they'd bring him back and forth every day. The trial was sensationalized. Over 500 people. Think about it. Let's think about the Caldwell County Courthouse that we grew up in. 500 people. No, hell no. What? 75 at the most. 100 at the most could get in there. Mm-hmm. Same concept. And I've been in the courthouse there in Richmond County, and it's the Gothic old history type jail or courthouse. Excuse me. I keep saying jail. Courthouse. The judge sits up a little higher, and it's all wooden, and the benches look like church pews, things like that. It's full. Photographers there, news crews there. 1957. Well, this was 1958, actually, when the trial occurred. Frank Wetzel was found guilty after a fairly intense trial.
And I'd never have asked you this. Do we know did he testify on his?
No, he did not.
Okay.
Did both troopers die in the same county, or was it
two different counties?
So they combined their.
They had two different trials, one in Richmond and one in Lee. They did. Okay. I think they tried to do one trial, but the legal issues, they did two different trials, and found him guilty in both trials. But they found him guilty with mercy in Richmond County, which I found was extremely unusual because I'd never heard of that verdict before. Which tells me that somebody on that jury felt sorry for Frank or believed some of his defense.
And I believe in some of the articles or the paperwork you have, it said that the sheriff even said he hoped he was found not guilty.
At one time.
Yeah.
The sheriff believed Frank at one time. But at the end of it all, they interviewed the sheriff, Goodman, and he said, well, Frank came to me after the trial and said, well, I've committed a lot of crimes in my life. So I'm happy. I'm okay with this verdict. I'm good. So Sheriff Goodman said, I believe he's guilty at the very last. But I think he and Wetzel became friends a little bit, and Goodman felt sorry for him at one point. But I think Goodman was just pissed off because he wasn't in his jail. That's obvious today. You can see it because Goodman wanted all that attention. And I don't know Sheriff Goodman. I've only heard good things from him, from the people there, and I interviewed a lot of people from Richmond County, and they all, Sheriff Goodman was the man back then. Okay, back to Mr. Terry. He has a Bible with him, with his name, his lady's name on the outside of the Bible, and all of us have family Bibles, but then Mr. Terry's name was inside the book. When you opened the Bible up, it was right there, and a pair of leather gloves. He didn't retrieve those things when he de-assed that Oldsmobile that night. He didn't get that Bible and gloves. They find those items in that cut-through road I was telling you near Rockingham Speedway. That's where they find the Bible and the gloves under a tree, kind of just thrown out, you can tell.
Again, good police work.
Good damn police work. They went and backtracked everything. They find those items, and they use that in the trial. Mr. Terry identifies him. They find the evidence. They find the vehicle stolen. They find fingerprints in the car. It's Frank Wetzel. There's no denying it.
What, firearms, or was that in that vehicle? Or
They found, and I'm just going to go over what they found in that car in the Oldsmobile after they shot the two patrolmen. 2 pair of binoculars, 1 Weaver high-powered scope for a rifle, two scopes actually, Browning .44 caliber Magnum, a box of .45 caliber shells, box of .30-30 rifle shells, WW carbine ammo cartridge, a .44 caliber Great Western Magnum pistol, .22 caliber revolver, another .22 Ruger 6-shot revolver, a chrome .45 Colt revolver, a case knife, a .30-30 rifle, a .30-06 Remington rifle, a Model 71 rifle, and a Model 721, multiple cigarette lighters. I still hadn't figured that out because there were several cigarette lighters stolen. And all that was covered in that 1957 Oldsmobile. So he had an arsenal. He was going to break brother out of prison.
He had broke into a bunch of hardware stores between New York and North Carolina.
He did.
Or he did one good.
No, I think it was a couple of them. They were able to show that. And they brought those people back for the trial. And that was in Pennsylvania where he stole most of the vehicles. I saw the tag, the Pennsylvania plate that was found on the car.
and it had his fingerprints on
it.
it.
His fingerprints. He broke into the men's store and stole gold rings, watches, several watches.
Bling.
Yeah, he was a high roller.
Yeah.
Or he was taking it to pawn shops.
Very well could have.
There you go.
Pawn shops are a big
But he had
big item back then, you know.
And again, and they didn't find all these items. They have it that they were stolen, so that's a strong possibility. He broke into a store in Roanoke, Virginia, and that's where he stole the pants and had the pants fixed in Roanoke, Virginia. Which is, if you travel 220, you're going to come into Roanoke from Greensboro. Then he stole all those weapons. All right, he stole the 1957 Chrysler 300 with Tennessee plates. He stole a 1957 Chevrolet. He stole a 1957 Plymouth. He stole a wrecker from Shively, Kentucky. Stole the wrecker was a 1953 Dodge Wrecker, and he probably felt bad in that because he's been stealing all these new cars. Had to get an old wrecker. That's the only thing he could find a key. He wrecked one. And let me back up. He wrecked one of those cars in looks like maybe Kentucky, and it was a pretty bad wreck. He had a cut over his eye. A witness said he saw him outside the car wiping blood off his forehead.
Single car accident.
Yeah, that's when I think he stole another. He did. He stole another vehicle there. Near Louisville, Kentucky.
So his route was from New York to North Carolina, back north, and then straight west.
Straight west. And that when he left Kentucky, no sign of him. And I looked at maps. I've got old maps from that era and saw the roadway. Remember, there are no interstates. The roadways and basically where he traveled to get to Bakersfield, California, his route. Captain Welch was the captain's name from the Highway Patrol, who I look at as kind of he was a smart man and did, like you said, good police work on that train ride back from Los Angeles, and was able to talk to him quite a bit. Okay, they ultimately executed Frank's brother in Mississippi. But like you said, in doing your research, you found that message that was sent from Attica to Parchman.
It was a newspaper article in the local Parchman, Mississippi market, and it was 2 days before the murder of the troopers, and it was talking about Frank Wetzel had escaped from Attica, and other inmates had informed the guards that he was on his way to Mississippi to spring his brother out of prison in Mississippi, who was on death row.
No doubt in my mind that he said that, because
and
he was such a talker and a braggart.
Yeah, and they were talking about extra security at that prison and locally in that town.
Mm-hmm. and he was arrested in September of '57 when he got sent to Attica, and that's when his sister got to him and told him, "Frank, you need help." And he's thinking in his head, "Okay, I'll go get help, but I can break out of that mental institution," which he did.
And just a teaser for future episodes. Just can you tell the listeners just how you come across, how this is kind of personal for you?
Yes, and that's
just a little bit,
right. The fact I was with the Highway Patrol and rose to the rank of major. While I was a major, well, let me back up a little bit more. When I was a lieutenant, I was stationed in the eastern part of North Carolina, and there was one of my sergeants there married Reese's daughter. So there was a little connection there because he would come in my office and we would chat. We became good friends. I called him Hoot. His name was Leonard Gibson, and Hoot was a smart man. He was a good highway patrolman. He was well thought of, but he would tell me stories.
Hoot Gibson was a cowboy.
Yes, I guess
actor.
how he got the
yeah,
name.
like
Yes,
a
that
and
was his nickname, Hoot.
Yeah.
And but we had a lot of coffee together and talks. And he would tell me about his wife and Frank Wetzel. And I knew about Frank Wetzel from school because it was instilled in us. All the patrolmen and troopers that were killed in the line of duty, we had to go and for 2 weeks during defensive tactics, look at the photographs, look at video of the later ones killed, and learn about what they did wrong or what happened in the case. And Wetzel always stuck out a little bit because it was 2 patrolmen in one night. And they were called patrolmen at the time, Jason, because there were no women on the highway patrol until
Were they
the
called
80s.
troopers at all?
No, they called patrolmen.
Highway patrolman.
Highway patrolman.
And they had red lights, not blue lights.
Red lights at the time. And when I originally came on, my badge said patrolman. It didn't say trooper. I still have that badge. But while I was on the patrol, I got promoted up to major, and I was in my office one day, and one of my assistants come in and said, "You're going to have to go to the parole commission and testify for the highway patrol to keep Frank Wetzel in prison," because he started parole in 1977, and he would have to go every 2 years to try to get out. He had an army of people in support of Frank Wetzel, clergy, the sports announcer I was talking about, lawyers, newspaper people that would come and testify for him, saying even if he did do this, he served his time. I was the only representative to go against Frank Wetzel being released, and I'll never forget the first time I walked in. I was a little nervous because there's 3 gentlemen sitting there. One was from Richmond County, one of the commissioners, the parole commissioners, and I testified saying, here's what happened. He killed 2 patrolmen. He changed the lives of 10 people, the family members of both patrolmen, their children, their grandchildren. All these people had to live a life without their father, their grandfather, their brothers, and I had a compelling story. But doing my research to prepare for it, I knew of Frank Wetzel, but I wanted to learn more. So I researched it. And a lieutenant that worked with me at the time, Lieutenant Poulin, Tia Poulin, she worked at the training academy. She was able to find all these items associated with the case, and I was able to look at them and say, oh, okay, that makes it real. I got to look at the photographs, the testimony, the transcripts of the trial. They even had photographs or a video, a reel-to-reel video. I don't know what millimeter that would be, 8 millimeter maybe, I don't know.
Probably back then.
Where it showed Frank being brought into the courthouse, hundreds of women standing outside the courthouse screaming, "We love you, Frank. Good luck. We love you," which was bizarre as hell. Mm-hmm. They made him look like a movie star is what it was. It was, this was big time. Well, they fell in love with him.
Did his defense capitalize on that or try to utilize that once they seen the natural charisma that he had?
Did. But researching his case, I became intrigued. So I wanted to learn more, as much of it as I could.
How long were the hearings last you'd go to?
The commission hearings?
Yeah.
And all day. And they would hear more than just one, of course, but Frank's was it was because the news media would pick it up. And several. There was only one reporter from WRAL that I could find in the Raleigh market. Nope, from the News and Observer, Raleigh News and Observer, excuse me. He has since died. He said, hell no. He needs to come out with on a gurney with his toes pointed up in the air, dead. Served his life sentence in prison for what he did wrong. And I agreed with him. Well, a lot of people didn't. Frank's brother has since started kind of his own little army to free Frank's name.
And a little background on that: that younger brother was not born at the time of the murder.
He was born, but he was small.
Okay,
He was 8 years old, I think, when his daddy brought him by train, Frank's dad, to meet Frank at Central Prison.
Yeah, okay.
While Frank was in prison, he became the man. Frank Wetzel was the man in North Carolina prison system. Even one of the wardens stated, and I've got that statement, and it was in the newspapers too, the warden said, I run the prison during the day, Frank Wetzel runs it at night. That's how powerful he was, and that's how smart he was. He read newspapers every day. He ended up marrying a lady named Bianca Brown. Bianca was very wealthy. I think she was from North Carolina at one time, lived in the UK, moved to Florida. She moved around quite a bit because she was had money, wealthy. And she married Frank through, they didn't have online, I guess, at the time, but they would meet and they'd have visits.
Convictsonly.com.
I guess.
That was
I don't
before
know,
that.
but she was intrigued by him and fell in love with him, and he fell in love with her, according to all the stories. They were married. And she paid for his people to come in to testify for him and to build a case, hired investigators, different things. And their only defense, Jason and Tim, was the fact that there was no way a man can drive between point A and point B during the night of the murders of Reese and Brown. And it was simply because the times were all screwed up a little bit.
Which is
natural,
normal in this case, yeah.
And Patrolman Covington probably got the time wrong. When he runs up there, he got the description of the vehicle wrong, whatever. But there was overwhelming evidence to show that Frank Wetzel was driving that car and that Frank Wetzel was responsible for the deaths of those two patrolmen. But in prison, he tells the story because this reporter would meet with him weekly and just take notes of everything he said. And Frank would just go into detail about his wonderful life, how he was so powerful in prison that, you know, the inmates tried to poison him. No, the guards tried to poison him one time. And I think he went to the hospital for stomach issues, but other inmates were sick as well. There's probably no telling how old some of that food they were eating. But they had a farm, and Frank went from Central Prison to different prisons throughout the state. The last one he was in was Piedmont Correctional Facility, I think is what it's called, in Salisbury. Mm-hmm. And that's where he died. He was 90 years old, suffering from dementia, best I can tell, and maintained his innocence the whole time. Never said, I killed those patrolmen, I'm sorry, let me out. And the story reads that had he been, shown remorse and apologized, that they probably would have given him parole.
They had paroled him in his
easily
late 60s, early 70s
of his age and his medical issues. But he always, I didn't do it, and I'm not gonna apologize to anyone. Okay, and he remained in prison his entire life. He ultimately got a life sentence and died in prison at 90 years old. Mm. So, and we're gonna have photographs of him that we're gonna put up, and we'll have photographs of some of the scenes there in 1957.
With this case being so detailed and so much stuff, I would think it's a possibility we do future episodes on this and go in more detail with some.
Right. What I'd like to do is, I've got audio tapes of people I spoke to, a sergeant that was there at the time. All these people have since died. How many years you said it was? 65 years. This will be the 65th anniversary this November.
In 2 weeks.
Yeah.
2 or 3 weeks.
So those people were in their 30s when this occurred, and they, Mr. Terry's still alive, as far as I know. He's in a nursing facility. He's in his late 90s. But he's saying now that the patrolman forced him into giving that statement. Jason, I read every transcript, every interview. There was never any he may have been treated roughly when they found him in that car, and there's no doubt. 1957, a poor old black hitchhiker in a car. He was probably yanked out, roughed up, and there's some photographs of him where it looks like he was in a wanted type. They had side view pictures of him, front view pictures of him. No telling how he was treated when he was first or apprehended or located in that patrol car. But bless his heart, damn, what, you're a poor old hitchhiker, and next thing you know, he's killing a highway patrolman, and he knows the shit's gone down, and he's trying to save this. He said he did everything he could do to save Brown's life.
If Wetzel would have never
Reese's life.
If Wetzel would have never picked him up, there's a chance he could have got away with this.
Mm-hmm.
If he'd have never
easily, there's no doubt in my mind. If Mr. Terry hadn't been there and been that witness, because slick as Wetzel was, he would have backtracked, done something, he'd have gotten away. But ultimately killed 2 highway patrolmen in one night. And it was tragic because of the loss to those families. But he served his life sentence and went to prison. So anyhow, it's been a long episode, and I know that, but it's a detailed case. And what I'd like to do is maybe talk about some of the interviews in the next episode, some of the people we talked to that kind of solidified the case and made it realistic and brought it to life.
Plus some of the newspaper articles we could corroborate with what showing the time frame.
I was able to secure a lot of those old newspaper clippings, and we can look over those and show how the trial was sensationalized, how Sheriff Goodman, the part he played in this case.
And you brought it up off camera, maybe what was popular or sign of the times in 1957 so whoever's watching this can get it in more perspective of how life was
right
in that time frame.
Okay, Dwight Eisenhower was the president. Remember that. Governor Hodges in North Carolina, the governor in California, I can't recall his name. But in that same note, 2 days ago, I called Bakersfield, California Police Department to see if I could find out who the officer was that originally arrested Wetzel, just to put in the story. They've not returned my call. I left a detailed message about what I was looking for, who I was. They've yet to return.
Do you know what
call.
charges?
I think he was charged with burglary tools or something of that. Back then, you couldn't, if you didn't have any money and you were found outside walking around at night, they could hold you. But I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know what the original charge was, but they were able to put it together with the fingerprints when they fingerprinted him. They had to charge him with something or they wouldn't have fingerprinted him, right?
Yeah.
So
similar to the Eric Rudolph apprehension.
Exactly like it. And what that occurred in western North Carolina.
Murphy.
Yeah,
it
was.
Murphy, where a young officer saw him going through a dumpster for food. And we'll talk about that case maybe later on because that was pretty unique. I was on call that night for the Highway Patrol as a major. They called me at home and said Eric Rudolph's been arrested. Hell, how long was he on the loose? Years. Yeah. After the Atlanta bombings.
And the abortion clinic bombings.
The shooting, the bombing where it killed the officer. And, we may talk about that. That was an interesting case. But they called me that morning, and like at 6 o'clock in the morning, said, comm center said Eric Rudolph's been arrested. And pretty big deal. But anyhow, there's a lot of similarities to that case with the arrest. Wetzel is a con man. He's a smart individual. He knew how to read people, and he knew how to con people, and he was able to do that throughout his life, even in prison life.
Yeah, and going back to the good police work, sometimes people will say, and it's just terminology or semantics, but they'll say the police got lucky. There's no such thing as luck. Good police work puts you in, if you see a vagrant and you don't do anything, that's bad police work. It's good police work when you get out and at least identify, see who they are, what they're doing, what they got on them. That's just basic good police work.
Thank God for that Bakersfield police officer. Yeah. And I think the best I could tell in all the research, and I keep saying that, but he looked like a young officer, and it sounded like a young new officer, but he did his job, and he took action on something and went a little deeper than just say, hey, get out of here. He went a little deeper. And the fact that they did all the fingerprints and they were able to follow all the trail for the most part, and they were able to make arrests. Yes, it was good damn police work in my opinion. So, but the community support was in favor of Frank Wetzel for the most part.
And we've seen that with the O.J. Simpson trial or other sensationalized,
right.
more recent.
And the fact that Wetzel looked like he did and was able to speak as well as he did, and he was able to just capture the imagination of an actual California movie star. And the fact that California played a part in this thing, and he was brought back from California on that Amtrak train. I'd love to have been on that train to hear what went on and what was talked about. But there's no doubt in my mind that any three of those would have shot his ass had he gone for that door. And there's no doubt in my mind that Frank Wetzel didn't look at that door and say, if there's a way out of here, I'm going to take it. And he would have.
Yeah.
He would have, just like he did. He was able to swindle his way to the medical facility institution there in New York. I don't know how far it was between Attica and this hospital, but I don't think it was too far. I think it was within a 20-mile ride from the prison to the mental institution. But the fact that he played football, the fact that he had that athletic background, kept himself in shape. Last I heard, at one point, he was doing 100 push-ups a day when he was in his 80s.
You couldn't make this story up.
No, you couldn't. And it'd make a hell of a book or a hell of a movie. Any of you movie producers out there, we'll talk to you. But anyhow, Frank Wetzel, look him up.
And this is just the beginning of it. We'll do some more on this.
And it's been fun with all three of us in here. I like that concept. We can and Tim's got his law enforcement background and can add to the discussion. So I think that's good. We're going to do Garrett and my favorite, Last Call. And let's don't forget Garrett Munday behind the scenes. And
the brains behind the operation.
He's back there working hard. Yeah. Anyhow, Last Call coming up. Looking forward to it.
Sounds good.
Thanks. Welcome back, everyone. This is Last Call, Monday afternoon roundtable. Three brothers here again. What do we got today, Jay?
We've got a special whiskey. It's Maker's Mark 46. Actually, it's a bourbon, I think, or a whiskey. It's
bourbon whiskey.
Yeah. And it's been around since 2010. The inventors and owners and brewmasters, distillery masters, whatever you want to call it, distillers, were a married couple and started Maker's Mark in the 50s.
Right.
This is their son who made this. He wanted to set out for the goal of his mom and dad to make the perfect tasting whiskey. And this was his. They made several different formulas, and this is his formula, number 46. There's a little bit. It's 94 proof. So it's
going to be good.
Yeah, it's a little stronger than the average. They use French oak staves. They put 10 virgin French oak staves into the distiller.
Which is a wooden stick.
Wooden stick. And it's supposed to add to the flavoring. I'm not going to give. We can talk about what they suggest. Talk about what it should taste like, things like that. We can talk about it after. I just don't want to influence our tasting. Does that make sense?
Right.
But it's a very popular selling one under their brand. And Maker's Mark has always been a popular whiskey.
One of my favorites.
Yeah. So this is just like a spin-off of a master formula type that they're looking at.
It's a Kentucky bourbon, but it's out of Louisville, I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it is.
I went to school with the Southern Police Institute at the University of Louisville.
It's Loretto, Kentucky.
Loretto?
It's probably close to Louisville.
Well, there was a brewery close by, and we could smell at night. When we got on the balcony, you could smell the aroma in the air of the bourbon being brewed. It was, or made. It smelled good.
Yeah, and they said it's part of the distilling process, and it's matured just long enough. They said it's imperative that it's matured at the right time, not too long and not too short.
Okay. You're the pour master today.
Me?
Well, it's me, isn't it? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
All the rules when I stay when
Yeah.
Tim, tell us about the wax.
each bottle is hand waxed. They dip it. A machine does not do that process. It's hand.
So each one's unique.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. It's got a unique dip to it. Now, what's the color? You said something about the color earlier.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, they only changed the color was once a year between the football rivalries of Kentucky and
The college, yeah.
And whichever team wins that year, they will do that color, the team color dip.
Don't laugh, Garrett. I have a hard time every week.
Hercules.
Hercules.
Don't you add nothing. Okay.
You twist it every time. Pull it out.
I'm trying. They put that damn wax on it.
Hey, we're getting there.
I don't know if we are or not, Jay. We might have, it's a cork and I can't get it to uncork. Here it comes.
There you go.
Damn, that was hard.
It's got a nice color to it, don't it?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you hear it pour? Maker's Mark, Stave Profile 46, Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. With a child-proof lid.
And adult proof, apparently.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
Last call.
It's a little stout.
A little warm.
Yeah, it's got a kick. And it did say that. I didn't want to say it beforehand. It was talking about how it's got a longer than usual first,
Yeah, it does.
I guess, bite to it.
Yep. I love the flavors.
Yeah.
I can taste the oak barrel, the oaky taste to it.
It was saying the taste is mildly sweet and uniquely layered with deep, rich notes of vanilla and baking spice.
I got the vanilla. I can taste that, but the
got
bacon I
vanilla.
can.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
It has aroma of French oak and caramel and the baking spice. The subsequent sips are not nearly as hard on
the
the
first one. As we talked before, it's a little, but I think it's good.
It's got
And
good
I've
flavor.
drank Maker's Mark, but that's a different blend. There is something different about it than the regular Maker's Mark.
While we're sipping on this, is there any interesting stories?
Well, we were talking about maybe doing a couple. What's the matter over here, Shug?
Go down the wrong.
I was thinking of a story. I said, well, we can't say that one.
Yeah, we discussed a bunch of stories, but they're not suitable for.
Yeah, I think we went through 10,
They're not,
Yeah.
not
and we just
suitable
can't
for
talk
TV.
about those. Yeah, not for a podcast. But I'm gonna start with a little one. It was I was with the Highway Patrol, and I've told this story to a couple people, and they think it's funny, but it wasn't funny at the time. But got a call. There was a lady intoxicated on the highway. It was a busy intersection, so I pull up, and there she is, and she's raising hell out there in the middle of the intersection, in the roadway.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she was drunk. She wasn't impaired. She was drunk. So I get out, and I'm trying to coax her to get out of the road where I can take her home or take her whatever. I didn't want to arrest her. Well, here she started fighting and crazing hell and just, a handful. So I said, well, that's it. You're under arrest. So I reached and kind of handcuff her, got her cuff on one arm, and she's fighting, and people are stopped. And I could tell they were laughing and just thinking it was the funniest thing in the world. And I'm having a hard time. She's a small, little, an older lady. But she was drunk and pissed. Got the handcuff on her, and I'm reaching for the other arm, and she looked at me and she said, "You dumb shit, I only got one arm." And she did, and her name was One Arm Mary.
That's good.
But she was, when she wasn't impaired, she was a pretty cool lady. But that was the joke for the longest time. I'm trying to handcuff a one-armed woman, but I got her to jail, but it was a handful. And I've arrested a lot of strong, brawly men, but that little woman back kicked my ass that day. One handful. She was a patch.
I caught some heck from my coworkers, but I arrested 2 sisters for drug buys. They were controlled drug buys, and the sisters one was in her late 60s, the other was in her mid 70s, and they lived together. And we bought drugs off of both of them. I'm not gonna mention their names. We did 3 or 4 buys. We got trafficking charges. It was on pills, and we bought a gun from one of them. Well, their house was beside a very busy convenience store. After we arrested them, first I caught slack. "Oh, you arrested grandmas and stuff, Well, then I get a call from another informant that says, "You need to go down to such and such convenience store." And I'm like, "Why?" And he wouldn't tell me. He's laughing. He said, "You just got to see it." He said, "You'll see it when you pull in the parking lot." Well, I pull in the parking lot, and the convenience store and these ladies' house share a fence, a property line fence. And on the fence is a big homemade sign that said, "Jason Munday's a bastard." And I'm going to use the alias Joe Smith is his informant.
That's funny.
So I got a kick out of that. I thought it was funny.
And your buddy said, "Jason, she knows you."
Yeah.
Hi, Tim.
I got sent to a what we called in the old days a Signal 5. Mm-hmm. Right? Alarm to a residence. Me and Jamie Haggerty, we were both single and young. And we get there, 2 good-looking.
Slim.
2 good-looking women were sharing a house. We talked to them. They're Lenore Ryan girls. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Said, "That house is good." They said, "Did you check under the beds?" "No." "Would you go check under the beds?" We go back in the house. I ripped the ass out of my britches. When I looked under that bed, it sounded like a shotgun went off. Jamie's already looked under his bed. He's outside back with those girls.
So you had to bend down and look under the bed, and your britches ripped.
I go outside. I said, "Come on, Jamie, we got to go." No, I said, "Let's go right now. We got to go." Well, the poor old girls didn't know what was going on. They go back in the house. Jamie's like, "Man, what the hell's going on?" I said, "Jamie, I've ripped the whole ass in out of my britches." He started laughing. He said, "You lying?" I said, I'm not. I was bent over, and he had his damn flashlight looking at the crack of my ass, and we looked, and them 2 girls was looking at us. I said, "Well, I've been busted twice already tonight."
Time to go.
Yeah.
There's no way you can fix that. Just just leave and with your head down and go.
It was so funny. Those were the good old days.
I'm going to tell another quick one. Got a call, breaking into the house near Granada Farms. Nice home. I pull up. The windows broke to the downstairs, and I'm going, okay, I called the station or the sheriff's office. I said, "I'm at the house." I said, "Is the owner on the way?" And they said, "Yeah." So I'm looking in the house, and it's tore all to hell. They vandalized it. I said, "Yeah, what?" I said, "There's a mess here." I said, so the man pulls up in a Mercedes-Benz. Pulls up and gets out. I said, "Sir, they've broken into your house." I said, "The door's locked." I said, "But they've broken in." I said, "They've tore it all to hell." He looked, and he said, "Well, that window's been broke for about a year." And he said, "That's my house." He said, "That's how I live." I was at the wrong house. It was next door. It was the house next door. Sorry.
Oh,
The house is still a damn man.
Yeah, nasty bastard.
Sorry about the.
All right, what are we going to rank this fine bottle of alcohol?
I got to finish mine.
Yeah.
Y'all rookies.
I poured you a baby pour.
Yeah.
I'm going to give it a 1 to 10, of course, on our scale. 1 being terrible, 10 being the best. I'm going to give it an 8.
I'll go with an 8.5.
Strong 8.
Yeah, I'll give it an 8.5. I like the hard bite at the first.
I do too.
And then then after that, it's very, very good. The flavor's great. It's smooth. It's very good.
Well, as we talked about before, that ice breaks it down a little bit as we're sitting here in the hot lights. But
I'm going to go a high 8 also. I enjoyed it.
So it's a solid 8.
It was a stiff first bite, but after that, it was good mellow drinks.
You got any funny stories about our producer back there, Big G, the Garrett man?
They're not G-rated.
I remember taking Garrett, me and my first wife, we took him to.
How many wives did you have,
I've
Bob?
got 2.
Damn, you sound like Tim.
Anyway, we took him to eat at Village Inn Pizza in Hickory, the old one, the original. He was probably 5 or 6 years old, and there was a little crackhead out front because that was kind of a bad area. It still is.
You're being judgmental.
I know I am. But I told Garrett, and the guy was loud and obnoxious and just haggard looking, he looked rough. And I remember telling Garrett, I said, that's why you say no to drugs right there. Because and Garrett, I don't know if you remember that. That ain't a real funny story, but it was just a memorable story.
And it was Tim you were pointing at, right?
Yeah, he got there late and he come walking in.
That's your daddy. I'm just sitting here figuring it up. Between the 3 of us, we have 7 ex-wives. Or 7, yeah, we've been married.
I got
7.
1 current wife.
I only have 1 ex-wife.
I got 1 ex-wife and 1 current wife.
So that's right. You didn't remarry. It was 6. Let me fix it.
I've only got 1. I've only been married 1.
That's the law enforcement MO right there.
We got some cool kids.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we definitely do.
Perry's still in grad school. She's doing well. Talked to her the other day. She said send money.
Yeah.
So I got to send her a little money. Her birthday's coming up, so yeah.
She went from Wingate to Alabama. Roll Tide.
Yeah. And then Big Brandon, he's killing it with the tattoo industry.
Yeah.
We're going to get him on the show.
We got to
sometime.
get him up here and get him.
Plus, he's a good firearms man.
That's what I was going to say. Not only is the tattoo stuff, but he's got the 3-gun competition and all that.
Yeah, he's ranking up there statewide.
Yeah,
so
he's good.
doing well. So yeah, and yours is still at Appalachian.
Appalachian. Got 1 at Appalachian and 1 here in town. And Grace is at Appalachian. Hannah's doing a lot of stuff here, working over here. She probably works 36 hours a
I see
week.
her every time I go over. She's working.
Yeah, works at the Burton's here in Lincoln and 1 in Newton. Shout out to Burton's Produce.
Yep.
Great stuff.
Yep, we enjoy going there. So, and we know Tim's son Garrett. He's our producer, and this is his brainchild. So we have a good time with it every week. But the last call's fun. We enjoy doing it, and it just makes our week much better. Makes my day a hell of a lot better.
Mm-hmm. It's the best part of our week. I look forward to it.
I do too. Just planning it and looking at stuff. And Tim brings all the cool whiskey and bourbon and stuff in.
I think that was my last bottle of free stuff I got from retirement party. I think that was the.
You need to retire again. That's
Yes,
pretty
you
good.
do.
You got a good setup.
I racked up that day.
Yeah, we had
But that's the first time I've had 46. What about y'all?
I've never.
Oh yeah, I've had Maker's Mark before, but
Yeah,
not.
but not 46.
No, but this is good. It was a good blend, good
It's
pick.
a darker color.
We have a pretty extensive liquor cabinet here at the office, and we had a little party Saturday. It was the
55th annual.
55th annual Apple Festival in Lincoln, North Carolina.
Yep.
How many people do you have? 60,000? 50 plus.
Yeah.
Easy. Right here in front of our office, and I think 49,000 of them come up here to drink. According to our empty liquor cabinet we got now.
And I was out of town working.
I know, right?
Missed the big bash.
That's a big case. Do you ever get that solved?
Yeah.
Good. You're going to close it out?
Yeah.
Good deal.
And Tim's got a big case coming up. I got a few, and we're just working those and staying busy, but life's good. Until next week, last call.
Last call.
Thank you.